Now let's bring in our Brisbane Bureau Chief, Adam Walters, to discuss this and the day's other big stories. Adam, great to see you. Look, the latest polling shows that 70% of Americans disapprove of Biden's decision to run again. Are you surprised by this?
Not at all, Shari. It constantly baffles me how Americans who we know are never short of a word can be so disengaged from the political process. I mean, it's not the first time we've had an elderly president. You think back to Ronald Reagan, there's a long list. Trump himself is approaching his 80s. Interesting to hear him talking about dignity there. But you've got to wonder, what are the Gavin Newsoms of the world doing and the other young state leaders? He's 55 years old. He runs California, a state of 43 million people. The Democrats and the Republicans just seem to have such a shortage of imagination and proactivity when it comes to unearthing potential leaders. 100%. The Americans, of course, we know they don't have to vote. It's not compulsory, but you would think by now that both the major parties in the United States would have a succession plan entrenched, and that, as we saw with Obama, you'd start to see them emerge years before it becomes such an urgent issue of replacement.
And the Republicans did seem to with Ron DeSantis, but the Democrats look like they're going to be left with Joe Biden. Now, closer to home, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, today acknowledged Indigenous Australians in the frontier wars during his commemorative address in Canberra.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who donned the khaki fought harder for Australia than Australia was sometimes willing to fight for them.
Now, Adam, the RSL is against incorporating the frontier wars in Anzac Day services, and I'm going to have the RSL President Greg Mellick on my show a little later to discuss this. But what's your take? Is this divisive or inclusive on Anzac Day?
I think it's belated, to be honest, Shari. I did a story for Channel 7 a few years ago on this very issue about the lack of recognition for Indigenous Australians who fought for a country they say was taken from them, you know, for the British Empire. They came back to Australia. They weren't entitled to the repatriation benefits enjoyed by other veterans. And the recognition from Anthony Albanese today about their efforts in defending this country, I think, has been long overdue. That's my opinion.
All right, and we'll hear from Greg Mellick on that a bit later. Meanwhile, the opposition today called for an end to the improper treatment of veterans following the Vietnam Wars. Peter Dutton said that we should remove narratives of shame and controversy, and he says that they continue to colour the Vietnam War. How have his comments, Dutton's comments, played out today, Adam?
Well, I think it has to be said. I mean, the veterans of Vietnam and Korea are often forgotten. We know that so much of Anzac Day's focus is on Gallipoli, and so it should be. It was the forging of the Anzac spirit. You know, more than 11,000 Australians and New Zealanders killed in that campaign alone. And of course, we also commemorated the loss of 45,000 Australians on the Western Front. So it's totally understandable that those events from World War I would dominate Anzac Day. They involve the birth of the Anzac legend, but at the same time I can see why the families of veterans from Korea and Vietnam would still be yearning for the recognition their loved ones deserve so thoroughly.
Critics say the Albanese government's decision to hand down the Defence Strategic Review on the eve of Anzac Day was disgraceful timing. Assistant Defence Opposition spokesman Philip Thompson, he's scathing in his comments today.
I am absolutely appalled that this Prime Minister and this Defence Minister are so out of touch to release the Defence Strategic Review the day before Anzac Day. I think that this Prime Minister is so out of touch, is disgraceful and disrespectful for what he did. And it really, to be honest, mate, it pisses me off how out of touch and misstep that they did to release the DSR the day before Anzac Day.
What's his point here, Adam?
Well, he's not making it very eloquently, I've got to say, Shari. But Mr Miles claims the release of the Defence Strategic Review just happened to coincide with the eve of Anzac Day. He insisted on Melbourne radio that the unveiling of the plans for our military's much greater impact in the Indo-Pacific have been planned some time for April, but as we just heard from Mr Thompson, he wasn't buying into this explanation. He targeted the Prime Minister specifically, claiming Anthony Albanese had been, she said, disrespectful and disgraceful, putting the announcement right next to our solemn day of commemoration.
Yeah, all right. And Adam, just lastly, Beijing has responded to the release of this defence review. China says that Australia has made baseless claims and using China as an excuse to boost its military capabilities. Have a listen.
What I want to emphasize is that China has always pursued a defensive national defense policy. We are committed to maintaining peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific and the world, and we do not pose a threat to any country. We hope that some countries would stop using China as an excuse to boost its military and not hype up baseless Chinese threat theories.
I mean, Adam, of course, it's because Beijing is being so aggressive that Australia needs to rethink its whole defence strategy, as we canvassed on the program last night. So, you know, these are really quite ridiculous comments there from the Chinese Foreign Affairs spokeswoman.
Well, China is an economic superpower, regardless of how you want to rate its military status in the world. We know that the United States, too, has strategic interests in maintaining its profile in the Indo-Pacific region. They said as much last year. They're redoubling their efforts after what many described was a period of neglect from the USA. I think that all of this talk at this level belies the reality of the fact that so many Australian businesses and small business people have a direct economic relationship and indeed a dependency on China for their livelihoods, and all of that reality seems to transcend this constant debate over whether China is aggressive or defensive, or whether the United States is defensive or aggressive. Right. It seems to go back and forth.
Yep. All right. Adam Walters, thank you very much for your thoughts today.